every asset we put together a full playbook. There's been a lot of short-term apartment operators that haven't done well because they've done the lease arbitrage. And so I think that's been a challenge in the market because there's been 5 or 6 that have raised equity and haven't been successful. There's a few that have gone public, the few that have done well. Our model is totally different from them because in that we're managing the whole building.
Okay, welcome to the Digital Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reed.
It's funny reading because we're here in Colorado, and yet we just watched a few seconds of video from when we recorded this out in California, and we were in like hoodies and, well, we were like all geared up a little bit. You did have shorts and flip-flops, but for the most part, you would think California would be the, I wouldn't be in shorts here and not there, but just saying.
Yeah, well, those that know Colorado know very intense seasons, you know, and so this is the time for shorts and a t-shirt because it's like 98 degrees at 5,300 feet, and for you at 8,000 or whatever, you can feel that. That's pretty intense.
Yeah,
and you know the hoodies, you got to have those out at Huntington Beach. You know, when you're out there. We learned that the hard way.
Yeah,
a few years ago. Yeah, we were freezing our butts off, and then there's also like beating down sun and
I think this
multiple use cases for hoodies out there.
That actually is a fun story because so the first year we were doing AIMS, this would have been 2018, I think. We were invited to do the startup showcase to show Fiona.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Is this right? Am I thinking?
No,
the right
I think
one?
you're right. I think you're right. That sounds. Yeah.
Or maybe it did.
I was going to say,
did
is
we
it
buy them
19?
before the fire pit?
The first time we went, we didn't have badges because
right. Well, we got to present, but then we had to be like kept out.
We were kicked out after that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyways, we did not have much money, and we were like, "Oh, let's hang out on the beach," and it was cold AF.
Yeah.
And so we went into the little store in the, I guess in the hotel, and they had some like Quicksilver hoodies or something. And they only had large, which is large.
Worked for me.
Yeah, worked for you nicely. And we looked at the price tag, and they were like $85 each. And we both looked at each other, and we're like, "We earned it." Let's
totally. We hadn't really
get matching hoodies.
earned shit at that point, but it was more like, trade-offs here. Add it to the credit card.
Nicole was
I still have that thing, and it was a very good hoodie. It was actually, I will go as far as saying priced pretty accurately.
Meaning you got $85 of value.
I have definitely gotten $85 out of that hoodie.
We still have it too, whereas many get trashed pretty quickly. So you are right; it is high quality. It has lasted. But
Zipper's still on. Yeah.
I remember Nicole being like, "You guys, did you put that on the company?" Because she's like, "Of course we can't put this on it personally. We can't afford a hoodie."
Yeah,
right now,
exactly.
dude." And it's like, "Yeah, no, it was totally on the company." And she's like, "Well, then why didn't I get a hoodie?" I was like,
because now we're talking $240, Nicole.
Yeah. One of us has to suffer, and I guess it's you today.
Yeah. Love you, honey.
Yeah, that's so funny. All right. Well, this episode is with Sentral. Reed, you want to give the elevator pitch for Sentral?
Super high-end operator. Primarily, I think has assets, if not exclusively, in like top 10, top 20 markets. And really boosts, kind of, I think through the experience, whether it's the amenities or kind of concierge service, like ultra white glove, creates a spectacular experience. Think Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, for apartment living that does translate for their owners, their clients, to actually a much better bottom line. So what they get for rent on, cost per square foot, and then how it all, not to make it about money, but I think he doesn't shy away from, Roman doesn't share some of that up front, because it's like, why would somebody do this? How could you afford it? And it's like, if you have the capital and you work with Sentral, it seems almost like a no-brainer, like just an amazing outcome, which kind of blew me away. And I think I asked a lot of questions about how do you market these assets? How is it different? How do you think about that? What's the churn? I mean, some of those basic questions, but it does beg the question, and I think either one of us, if not both of us, got there. Why not more markets? Why not more competitors? If this almost too good to be true, kind of situation, is it just the fact that it's such a high tier that there's not enough, I guess, investors? Maybe there's perceived risk, with assets of that magnitude. I don't know. Stay tuned. Listen, he'll excuse me, he'll cover off on that.
He did say that you are limited because he was like, they are the best addresses in the best cities. But basically, it's kind of like what he was saying.
Finite
And
inventory.
exactly.
Yeah.
Meaning, yeah, finite opportunities. He's
Yeah.
like, this isn't going to work. I think he actually said something like in the Midwest. He's like, this needs to be like LA, New York, that kind of thing.
Yep.
So I don't know, but I don't remember getting to is like, what is his TAM? Like what could he do? Or is there a version of it that would work in Dallas? You know, maybe that's what they end up doing. But right now it seems to be working for them. And it's super interesting because I remember when we first started working on properties that had a penthouse for like 10 grand and we were like, who the heck would pay this? And this is like well beyond that.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know if you remember, but are these like column flips or renos, rehabs, like at a whole nother level? Or are these things that are built from the ground up? You know, because he talks so much about like building kind of around, you know, in the experience. I just don't remember as much as like, yeah, every one of these, like, you know, we break dirt.
I think I don't know I remember him specifically saying that they can't really switch management once it's done. So I would think it is built by them because he was like, there's certain things that like to give this experience only we are able to do at this point. And so you can't really change management on us once it's implemented.
Yeah.
Because that made it sticky. Because I was curious about his like turnover because management companies get turned so fast or so many times. So
I won't lie, I want to do a tour. Know what I'm missing, but maybe I don't, you know. But yeah, tune in if you want to hear this pretty remarkable company and what they're doing, this elite level, you know, in these markets. So it's super fascinating.
Totally. Okay, we're here with Candace and Roman. I'll start with Roman. Introduce yourself.
Roman Speron from Sentral. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Sentral.
Yeah, Candace Kelly, Director of Communities at Sentral.
Awesome. And why don't you guys, for those that don't know who Sentral is or what they do, why don't you explain?
Yeah,
Sentral.
I can explain. Sentral was created to be a full service operator of the whole building within Class A assets across the country. We operate hospitality products in those buildings that include furnished units, sometimes food and beverage, sometimes private membership clubs to lift the overall asset value and revenue, and at the end of the day, the bottom line.
Yeah, you were telling us a little bit offline about that and how much per square foot you get and whatnot. So maybe if anything you could share with us to put a finer point on when you say like, because I feel like everyone says raise revenue.
So our average rent across our unfurnished products in our portfolio is $562 a square foot. So that should already qualify the type of assets we're handling. They're usually the best projects in the country within the markets they're in. We're in 21 different markets, and you know, six of our projects in Los Angeles are getting over $7 a square foot. We've homes that are renting for $20,000 to $30,000 a month. But you know, generally speaking, the cities that we're in, where our products are the nicest in those cities. So, Chorus in San Francisco, the Modern in Seattle, the Battery in Philadelphia, Figaro 8, the Park in Los Angeles. So, you know, those are noteworthy projects. But we're also Central superpower, and what they were born to do is we leverage furnished demand within our assets, where we can drive you know, a differentiated demand funnel, and it can really drive prices up well above that 542 or 562 a square foot. We can get about 100 to 120% lift when we can furnish a unit and drive demand through that unit on either a 3-night stay, a 30-night stay, or a 70-night stay across our portfolio.
That's fascinating. Is that via like the traditional like short-term rental platforms, or is that through like corporate, you know, agreements?
So there's two avenues we utilize. We leverage Highgate Hotels, which is an investor and partner in our business, to drive a shorter term demand, and on the longer term demand side, we are generating about 220 corporate accounts. We're able to drive business directly to the site through, you know, providers such as Synergy Housing, National Corporate Housing, and then businesses like Tesla, PricewaterhouseCoopers, those types of businesses. We're able to bring in furnished demand, which otherwise wouldn't be there in a traditional apartment building.
Got it. So Candace, on the marketing side, how does that change what you do versus, you know, what we might think of as conventional third party?
Yeah, absolutely. So to Roman's point, typically our product is the most elevated in some of these markets, and that's tough to do year over year when you're in predominantly these urban markets, right? So we look at traditional multifamily in this stack of we need to be on some level of high exposure based on the product type. For traditional ILSs, we need some realm of PPC, but really it comes down to having to specialize it, right? So not our typical target demographic may vary not only by market, but really by price point and product. And so we're really having to look at traditional marketing strategy or traditional marketing advertising mix, not only amount of dollars that we may need to create that exposure and broker relationships, et cetera, but really looking at what our demographic, where they're actually searching for, rents that are $25,000 to $35,000 a month, not always a traditional ILS. And so we're having to really break down and pay very close attention by way of clean attribution, as we hear a lot, and making sure that our dollars are working for us. And sometimes that takes looking at on a more frequent basis and really ditching the idea that your typical marketing mix with a regular multifamily product, it's kind of out the door. So you have to start from scratch. So.
Sounds like less set it and forget it than maybe
Absolutely.
many of the other marketers in the space are.
Absolutely.
Does that then change your tech stack and how do you like what you need to manage like the marketing? And I'm sure it must on the operation side too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a pretty unique tech stack in terms of we want to be able to integrate where we can and provide consistency between the hospitality leg of the business and also the long-term, traditional unfurnished product. But really what we look at from a customer experience standpoint, we try to provide a lot of consistency with that. So looking very carefully at the programming that we're using for communications specifically. But in terms of, our CRM usage, we're able to funnel, a bulk of what we have into one general kind of touch point. So yeah, we just look at it a little bit differently in terms of one house versus the other when it comes to traditional PMS stack.
What about you, Roman?
Operationally?
Yeah, I mean, I'm marketing. Like, I feel like marketing's already been challenged in the space traditionally with like integrations and like data shares and that type of thing. And I just imagine it must be the same on your side too.
Yeah, I mean, on the operations side, we have our own app we utilize across our business units, and that app integrates with 5 door lock systems, belly systems, food and beverage systems. In some cases, we have an event business within our built projects as well. So it's leveraging all that technology, and it's really meant for be a consumer best in class product versus the stuff that was made in Middle America and intended for B product. We're focused only on the A product, and I think that's where we're able to leverage some of our private membership experiences, which you would typically see in a country club, but in this case, you see it in an apartment building. And so, yeah, our chief technology officer is integrating 20 to 30 different APIs into our front forward facing app, including the management systems that we use.
So that'll take me. I've been very curious about learning how scalable the model is. As you said, like you mentioned, like we have the best asset in San Francisco, and you mentioned other markets. So is it scalable, or how do you think?
Yeah,
about
so
that?
we don't look at this as doing 100 new buildings a year. We're doing 10 to 15 projects a year in the cities and the markets we want to be in. So we've been very selective on the assets we take on. Not every building makes sense to us. Generally speaking, we need to have a pretty robust rent roll to make sense of it, and it has to be in a primary city, maybe a gateway city across the country. There's probably 30 35 cities that we would consider going into, but it doesn't work in every market. In the current version, we really want to just do 10 to 12 to 15 projects a year, and so that's what we're on pace to do in 2024. We've taken on 5 new projects this year to date, and we don't have a set and forget it like you mentioned earlier. Our mentality is we think like an owner, we act like an owner. We're not a third party operator. We think of ourselves as a second party operator, and we tend to stay away from property management because it becomes such a dirty term. And so we see ourselves as an operator. Sometimes we're operating apartments, sometimes we're operating hotel units, sometimes we're operating a bar. It really depends on we're solving the real estate problem and thinking like an owner.
I was going to pass it to Reed, but now I have to ask a follow up on that. Second party owner, tell me about that.
It has to do with incentives. It has to do point of view. A lot of the folks that are on our team hasn't spent their life growing up in third party property management. They didn't grow up that way. Most of our team's college educated. They came from a place where they kind of found their way into the business, and oftentimes even our property level staff, we operate projects without a general manager in them, and so we think differently. We staff them differently than other competitors in the market. I wouldn't say there's a competitor, but I would say other property managers. That's scalability works really well for them. They can do 150 new projects a year. We're not built for that. We don't want that. We have a really heavy corporate team, and we're really looking at exacting and perfecting projects.
So it sounds more like, as you say, almost. Do you guys take an ownership stake in the properties at all, or
No.
is it still fee based?
Still fee based,
but
yeah.
it's just the way that you're thinking more like what the owner.
Well, and
would
we
wanna
have
think.
incentives that are aligned with the owner's outcome, what's best for their owner's outcome.
Okay, I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like almost like the 20-mile march read. I'm thinking like with Jim Collins. Have you read any of his
of
work?
course. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So
Good to
that
great.
where it's like, okay, let's add 10 or 12 a year, but let's not try to do 50 a year.
Yeah.
But that stacks, right? Like it does become, because you're not trying to also shed 10 properties a year, right?
No.
Like who else can do what you guys do? It doesn't sound like really anybody right now. Therefore, you hold on to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a race from a pricing perspective as an operator to the basement, right? People are trying to compete at the lowest costs, and we're looking at is how do we drive the most revenue? And if we can drive, $100, the building should make $65 to $70 of that revenue. And so we're focused on top line growth and top line revenue, and the owners we work with understand and value their real estate. Their real estate is very prideful. It's a physical asset. It's something that they, enjoy seeing grow up and mature, and they don't want to see something deteriorate. And so, the old saying of you pay for, right? We are attentive. We are thinking like an owner. We have much heavier burden as far as our corporate resources on an asset, just because we want what's best for the project.
Mm-hmm. Well, Reed, I could keep going because this is fascinating. So
is
I got to give
fascinating.
you an entry.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'll start with where we just were touching on the operator and the top line growth. Do you stop short though of really getting into NOI?
Yeah.
So as an operator, that seems like that's where you're really going to have to spend a lot of your time.
Yeah.
Is that more their responsibility in a way? Like you'll figure out how to make the margins on this. Our job is just top line.
No. I would say that it's easier to qualify top line because there's a lot of things going in the bottom line, like real estate taxes, insurance, and things you don't have control over. But on our, it really depends on the business unit we're running. So every asset we put together a full playbook, right? This is how we're going to operate the project, and we segregate kind of the break-even departments. For instance, in our projects, we're running our own package program in the units. So we're charging $25. So that package delivery, which we'll deliver into people's homes, affords us the ability to have extra staff at the project. We make a profit center on that. Maybe you make, depending on the building size, $10,000 to $40,000, but those margins are different, right? They're deteriorated from what you generally see in an apartment business. And so we segregate like a hotel, break-even departments. Mm-hmm. But our traditional unfurnished elements are run at the same margin, 65 to 70% efficient, as what you'd see generally acceptable in the industry. Okay. But when you start to talk about, furnished rentals, it depends. If we're staying for a night or 3 nights, we're not running that at a 70% margin. This hotel is running at a 20 to 25% margin, maybe. And so we're running that business at a 50% margin, mm-hmm. more or less. Mm-hmm. If it's a 4.5, 5 night stay on average, mm-hmm. it really depends on the overall playbook. And so it's hard to be specific, but across our portfolio, our lifts are between 20 and 25% NOI lifts.
Wow, that's fantastic. So David is asking about scalability, which made me question, I think, and we've seen this with some of the larger management companies, conventional, about the fear of cannibalization, and they have different owners and they've got this value prop, but there's a decent concentration of properties, mm-hmm. which you guys aren't, there yet, but even having 6 of these properties, you said in LA?
In Los Angeles, yeah.
Yeah. Does that ever come up where it's like we've created this exceptional and you start seeing residents moving between these properties that are owned by different clients?
Yeah, occasionally. I mean, you can't do, with that type of density, you can't do a lot of those projects, right?
Yeah, right.
Los Angeles, the greater Los Angeles area is almost 20 million people.
Right,
so,
right.
They can afford a little bit more, and that's, seen or be seen type of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think there is more exceptionalism there. But our projects in Brentwood, in West Hollywood, in Beverly Hills, in Santa Monica, and downtown LA, they are totally different markets. They, if you're
Sure,
familiar with LA,
sure.
they're totally different markets, and so we don't think there's a cannibalization within those. It doesn't mean that people can't move from West Hollywood to Beverly Hills. So we do have some of that. The good news is we control that market, and so really know. We know the divorce attorneys. We know the estheticians. We know all the people that are doing, the search terms that we're looking for and buying in those markets are significantly different than other people. We're we're very close to the people at the agency, and so we understand what the appropriate marketing platform is for that, right?
Yeah.
We have people dedicated to just that because we specialize that in LA. It's not the same in every market.
Yeah. Well, two questions, Candace, for you, kind of translating here, or transitioning. We often hear, again, from some, and I'm not trying to be evasive, but some of the top management companies about, the idea of really marketing their brand. It's like versus at the property level. So I'm curious with Sentral, how much of that you've had to grapple with, or is it a very clear distinction or decision where it's like, we don't really market Sentral. We're not aiming for 4 seasons here, like with these properties, like where everybody knows the Sentral name. We're all about the property. Or is it a blend of the two, or are you actually really trying to build up the brand Sentral as you continue to grow?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, some value in, relatability or familiarity from a brand standpoint. But I think it really goes back to the ability that we're chosen because we can curate. And so I think it's probably a blend of the two.
Okay.
I think when it makes sense and when an owner shows up and says, hey, here's my hand, I'm happy to follow you. Great. Maybe that's when we apply, that Sentral brand. But a lot of our owners, do take, as Roman said, a lot of pride in their assets. And that's something that they want forward facing. They know that they have the reputability in terms of, the experience and the bench strength behind a lot of our operators, both on the hospitality and the traditional multifamily side. But I do think it's a blend of both. But it really, again, goes back to we're able to be more boutique, more curated, more specialized. And I think that stands out when it comes to aligning with new business because they want that flexibility. They don't want, we are this shop. This is what you have to choose. This is the mix that we recommend for you. It really is a culmination of both. And I think it's definitely scalable, but you have to be consistent from day one in terms of being able to curate that for your client from a third party standpoint.
Totally makes sense. And then from a marketing standpoint, you said, this often doesn't work with traditional ILSs. Not to say that you're not policing on some of those, but could you share a little bit more about when you said we often have to use traditional and non-traditional? I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but what does some of these strategies look like as you're marketing these properties? And one other question that I have to ask is, how much do you guys work with apartment brokers? Because it seems like at this level of kind of rent, I guess, this demographic, that would be a pretty, common strategy for you guys.
Yeah.
Just like single family, if I'm buying a $3-5 million home, I'm more likely to have somebody, right, that I'm working with versus just going on Google and searching around. Not that I wouldn't do that too, but
I look on Craigslist when I look for my $5 million home.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Is that how you found your home?
Yeah.
Could you share a little more about the marketing strategies and then how much you guys do work with brokers?
Yeah, absolutely. So to tackle your first question, I think we would be silly to say that we don't need to be on some of these larger players, but it also has a lot to do with the generations that we're serving, right? I think that we don't really have a one size fits all demographic in terms of age range, and I think that a lot of what's shared within our industry as of lately in the last year, 2 years, is that we have to be able to be nimble in our marketing approach and market to the boomers that can afford the price point, market to the Gen X, market to the millennial. But guess what? We still have Gen Z that can afford it. We still have the Gen Z remote workforce that's interested in a network of travel opportunities that they want to live somewhere for 30 days, 90 days, and then they want to live somewhere else, right? So we really have essentially 4 generations that we're marketing to. So we would be silly to say that we can't rely somewhat on our traditional ILS partners just in terms of transparency. And hey, we got to be able to be searchable, but we do have to keep in mind, kind of that min-max range that a lot of ILSs, focus around. That's generally the first place that folks go. Either that neighborhood or price, right? And so it's not often that you'll find a competitor that you're truly neck and neck with when it comes to these higher price ranges. And then additionally, to your point, maybe I'm not trying to look at an apartment, but maybe I'm sharing, kind of in that shadow market. And maybe I'm sharing between, do I want to rent a home? I know I'm not going to be here for 5 years. I may be here for 2 to 3 based on a contract or based on, whatever I have, going on with my employer. But on those terms, I may not want to play with apartments. I may be considering also single family homes. So when we do make partnerships with ILSs, we need to make sure that they really have as much first party data and also share in some of that first party data for those that are considering home rentals. So for example, partnerships with, homes.com or Redfin or any additional, ILS listings that would have tertiary market support, because we have a lot of clients that kind of play in both worlds.
Makes sense.
The ones that can afford our higher price point may also be considering homes, and we want to be able to have some visibility there. But realistically, for some of the full service building offerings that we have, we're really going to be doubling down on digital strategy in terms of PPC, maybe precision mobile targeting, things that we really want to diversify that digital strategy versus really bleeding out in that pay to play, ILS marketplace strategy. So we really have to pay very close attention to what that cost per lease is for those ILSs, and double down on that, PPC strategy and get a little bit more granular. To answer your question about brokers, I think definitely for some of these high dollar projects, it's an absolute necessary. Some of ours don't have really any traction when it comes to traditional ILSs in those higher price point markets. And so it's absolutely a necessary relationship, and it's very, very lucrative for the product types that we have. So we work a lot with brokers.
I bet. I'm also picturing, and this is, I don't even know if the show is still running on HGTV, but Selling New York, Selling LA, and they will have these big community events. And given that you're doing marketing community, and because where those networks are, that's going to be an incredible source. So do you guys host many of those, or is that only on occasion? Maybe some of these top LA properties.
Yeah, I would say that if we break down the portfolio, about maybe a quarter of them are at that price point, that $20,000 to $30,000 a month. The rest of them are $4 to $7 a square foot, which is still a lot, but most of our buildings are in gateway cities, and so if you consider what those prices are ordinarily, they're probably 40% more affordable, but not that much more expensive. So I think we don't deploy the same strategy across, like Candace said, we don't deploy the same strategy across our portfolio, but we look at the individual opportunity to market to a differentiated group of people. And definitely we are hosting events like that. In a traditional building, we probably wouldn't do those, but we have had movies filmed, TV shows filmed, especially with you talking about the short-term rentals. There's elements where we actually have, what was the show in Chicago that they filmed, like Married at First Sight, in our building, and that's happened a few times. And so it makes sense when you have film crews staying there for 30, 45 days that they'll take a residency. And we have a high rise in Chicago called Sentral, Michigan Avenue, and we have about 120 furnished units there. And so that makes sense, right? Take a unit for 30, 45 days. It's good for traveling nurses. It's good for people relocating from city to city. So before they decide. And so it's nice to have kind of all those tools in your tool belt.
Yeah, I got one more and then I'll pass it back to David. So if you're willing to share, what does typical churn look like? So we're accustomed to 50%, and I know you have to unpack this a little bit based on how long
market.
Market and how long they're staying. But I can also imagine you might feel a little more pressure, and I'm not trying to stick on the top 25% and 20 to 30,000, but I'm like, if I have a unit that's worth 20 to 30,000 that's not being occupied, that puts a little bit more stress on me than if it's renting out at 2,500 a month. So if you guys could just share a little bit more about churn, and then
maybe it's effective occupancy, right? Like if it's a lot of the short term.
We look at it as RevPAR within the short term space, right? So RevPAR is rate times occupancy, and so you'll figure that out. And so it's all about RevPAR, just like you would in a hotel. On the traditional side, we're competitive, not higher, because we have less supply of unfurnished homes, and so we're running, depending on the market, 96 to 97% occupied, and generally 2 to 3% above our competitors, just because we have less inventory, because it's taken out due to a different set of demand through the furnished element. So that's and there is some synergy between the two asset classes, right? Like within short term, turning into long term, so it creates differentiated demand in that way too. So I think that maybe from a global perspective, kind of segregates it. And then I would say on the renewal side of the things, it really depends on the asset. Obviously, San Francisco has had tough go for a little bit of time, but we're about 15% over market in San Francisco on the renewals, and mainly because we're running a program where we're running 50 to 60 activations a month in a building. We're in a traditional apartment building with that wouldn't have a full service element to it. We're outsourcing the front desk and the porters are outsourced and using trash valet. That type of approach isn't the right of approach for that type of product. And so we're running 40 to 50 activations a month, meaning that we have events happening 40 to 50 times a month in our buildings. And so that creates that sense of community that otherwise isn't there. You're not just doing a wine and cheese night once a month through AT&T. You're running a real program, and we have people in place that's all they do.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Well, it seemed like you have more, but I'm ready. If you're done, you good?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm curious.
Well, all right. Never mind.
All right.
We do this. we this happens.
That's why,
sometimes.
his caveat.
I just before I forget,
I knew.
What's the biggest objection that you get from your clients or owners? Like this seems, I don't want to say too good to be true.
Yeah.
And I know you guys have to be really selective yourself.
Yeah.
You don't take every
Yeah.
client or every
Yeah.
building. But what is it? What are the objections?
How is it going to impact my cap rate on exit? I
Mm.
think that's the biggest question we get, and it
But
depends.
how is a good objection versus like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like, that's more like curiosity. Like, explain this to me.
Explain it to you. Yeah.
Versus like, I for whatever reason, like I'm not on board.
Yeah. I think
That's,
everyone's
to me,
on board.
buying.
It seems like everyone's on board to make more money, right?
Sure.
I don't think anyone's afraid of
wouldn't be?
making more
Yeah,
money,
yeah.
right? And so I think they're happy with that side. I think I think it's largely, I would say Fannie and Freddie will do probably up to 10%. If you're less than 10% furnished, you're okay with an agency loan in most cases. And so most of our owners that want to do this are willing to go up to 10%. Some of them are willing to go up to 20% because they have a different source of financing that they're not as concerned about, and they really just want to maximize. Across our portfolio, 15% of our units are furnished, and so that gives you kind of a cadence of where things kind of sit today. I suspect over time that goes up, but I think the biggest concern has been like, how do they treat that difference, that VIG in revenue, in NOI, and so I think it depends on how long the stay is, and it depends on what percentage in the building is dedicated to be furnished or not. And because at the end of the day, it's still an apartment building, you could still turn it into a 12-month lease at any given time if you needed to. And so we haven't seen any delta in sensitivity around cap rate or cap rate compression or elasticity in cap rate, but that's been a question that I think every owner's asked.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that's where I was going to go down challenges. So like, yeah, I mean, as Reed said, like a lot of what you're describing, all the numbers you've given have been very rosy.
Yeah.
So are there some challenges that we're not getting at? Like, what are you guys faced with?
I think there's egg on the face. There's been a lot of short-term apartment operators that haven't done well because they've done the lease arbitrage, just like we work and other folks. And so I think that's been a challenge in the market because there's been 5 or 6 that have raised equity and haven't been successful. There's a few that have gone public, the few that have done well. Our model is totally different from them because in that we're managing the whole building, and there are elements in the building that are furnished, sometimes that are not. 50% of our buildings don't have any furnished element in them. The other 50% have furnished elements in them.
Yeah.
And so I think it really depends on solving the problem. Generally speaking, we're going to be more expensive on an operational cost. Some people have a hard time understanding how these departments break even, but we have some really fantastic owners and people that we worked with for a long time that will speak to those folks, and it makes our life a lot easier. And then we're able to, show them videos of our projects, but we do things a little bit differently than other folks, and so it takes some time to understand the whole enchilada.
Yeah, totally. How about you, Candace? Any other challenges that are different than normal?
I'd have to say bandwidth. It's
Yeah.
tough. We run pretty slim with some really phenomenal brains, but only a few of them, right? Within our marketing department, we don't have really a lot of the bench strength in terms of, sizability. But that also comes with, portfolio distribution. I think it comes with that ideology that you're getting something bespoke, you're getting something unique. And so with our, marketers that oversee specific portfolios, they're relatively small compared to some, larger PMCs. So it's a lot of that conversation of how much time does it take to break this apart. But because we need to break things apart, really strip it down and build something, very special and uniquely designed to that asset, that it takes a much smaller kind of portfolio size oversight than maybe a traditional marketing department. So it's really talent curation. And I think it's finding people that are really passionate about the mission compared to other marketing departments that I've led. You really have to find a very unique, high risk, high reward type of personality, and somebody that really understands how to create that customer experience for both, that hospitality division and that multifamily division.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we'll let you guys go after this. I know we've kept you long, but I'm with you, Candace. I would think that this would require more hands-on than the traditional community.
Yeah.
So my last thing here is percentage of revenue for marketing spend. On the traditional apartment, I'm always perplexed why a building may cost $50 million to build, and then they spend less than 1% of revenue on leasing it up. Because to your point, Roman, if you drive more marketing, you get more leases. I think you can push rents up higher than normal. But many operators are looking at almost like shorting a stock versus investing in a stock.
Totally.
And there's only so much you can short by cutting expenses. So
Yeah.
how do you guys think about that when it comes to marketing expenditure? Is it more than, I guess, the average third-party management company, or is it still in line?
I'd say for some of the product type, it can be more, but I think that we do a really, really good job at the level of experience that we have in terms of what we know to be reasonable for X. And so I think we do a really good job when it comes to, contract negotiations and really looking at, do we have to be on, for example, this package level for X amount of time? And so I think it really comes with kind of front loading what that budget strategy looks like. So I would say it's probably comparable. And I think in some cases at some assets, we do probably a better job at reducing that bottom line.
I would say that the event part is where we put that in marketing. And so our event business is probably a little bit more robust than other folks. And then when there are brokers in the fold, we are trying to attract them because they will bring you a, $300,000 lease, $200,000 lease in some cases, and so you're paying a broker, 3 to 5%. So those and we have a higher level of resident referrals. We're trying to generate more demand from our residents.
Makes sense, yeah.
And so those are the atypical, but that is a cost per transaction, it's a variable cost, and it makes sense in that instance where I think Candace is saying that the fixed cost we try to reduce as much as we can to allow for the variable cost to kick in.
It makes total sense. I mean, what we've seen is that people, they have too much fixed cost and they don't vary.
Yeah.
And they could reduce their overall spend if they reduce their fixed costs and have variable options. But anyways, Reed, before we let them get out of here, anything?
Yeah, just one other question. When you say, each property is so unique, custom, based on demographic, market, all that stuff, how do you guys determine, because it sounds like it's not, a playbook that you're just like lifting and dropping in regardless, what amenities, what the experience is going to be. So I'm trying to get at the research here. How do you guys determine that? Or, I'm sure there's some research. So if you get a new asset, how much time and how do you go about that? Trying to make sure that you get it right. Because obviously these are some pretty big decisions, right? These kind of commitments that you guys are making to this incredible experience. So you gotta get it right.
Yeah, I would say that there's, Greystar has their scale, right? Bozzuto has their reach and their overall market. I think where we win is we can be niche. We can go deep, really deep. And so when we're going deep, it's part of what I think why we're winning business and why people are trusting us because of the real estate. So we're going deeper than others. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but we spend an awful lot of time on the deals we're taking on, and we decide whether or not they're the right project for us. It's not just here's a SWOT analysis and this is what's good about your project, this is what's bad about your project. We are going deep to the point of almost our work's all done before we start on the asset. So we put a lot of work into the front side of that project.
I'm going to give you a funny specific example because David and I both got a kick out of one of the properties we worked with years ago in Atlanta had a cryogenic chamber in it.
Yeah.
And we're like, who decided to put a cryogenic chamber in this? And
How
are
do you
they
operate it?
are
Yeah.
they ROIing
Yeah.
this? You know,
Yeah.
it was just one of some very unique amenities, incredible experience at this place. And that's what I'm getting at is how do you guys know whether in this property we're going to put a cryogenic chamber in this property we're not? Because you know, you got to go deep, as you said, up front. And so I didn't know if there's anything you could share and how you go about that research. Are you involved at all, Candice, in that process? Or is it like somebody else figured out whether to put the cryogenic? Now I got to figure a way to market it.
I think it can be both. I think when it comes to amenity activations, we can really help with determining, hey, one or the other.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I think a lot of our ownership groups will have, kind of a grand vision, and we'll pull obvious, demographic information in terms of life sets and what people are already doing within those areas, and try to kick it up a notch in terms of being a little bit more unique in those amenity offerings. But generally speaking, we will be handed this vision or this idea, choose one or the other, and then once we make that decision, it's really about executing what that branding and activation looks like, and what that will be built into the lifestyle of living in that community. So probably a little bit of both.
All right. I promise, last question. Can you give me any really fun example, like where you went non-traditional with your approach to a community beyond the digital marketing stack or whatever that, you're kind of fluctuating between? So where I'm going with this, we've heard about influencer marketing, celebrity marketing. You mentioned some of the 49er that's doing some of the personal training. Is that what you said? In one of these classes, one of these properties? Yeah. So I just didn't know if there's been any kind of fun, marketing techniques or strategies that you could share with us that are not as traditional.
I'd have to say we're really doubling down on influencer marketing, right?
Okay.
And really paring down with what that relationship looks like and what the ask is, not only for that market, but really at a national reach. Are we able to pull business from other markets and attract them to that market based on the reach of the influencer? So I'd say we definitely do a lot of influencer marketing as it relates to activating the spaces, because I think the spaces in a lot of these full service buildings are very unique. So I would have to say it's probably one of our specialties in terms of thinking outside the box, but it also comes with a lot of higher end influencer partnerships as well, not just someone with a lot of reach or following. So
right.
to align with the brand.
They have Santana teaching guitar lessons if you want to.
Yeah. Okay.
We have our project downtown LA. we have a Grammy artist that performed on Saturday in
Really?
8. Yeah. I mean, we are programming because we have directors of experience that are really programming the whole project. We have a private membership club on the 41st floor where we run. You have to subscribe to the membership club, and we have food and beverage folks that are there, and we have some pretty robust programming.
That's what I was talking about. That
Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Well, if people want to learn more about Sentral, where would you send them?
Starts with spelling. Make sure.
With an S. Central with an S. Just the website's fine. Sentral.com, or they can call me 415-854-0159.
There you go.
That's a first. I don't think we've ever had a phone number dropped on the
People
cast.
give out their email, but then they're like, actually, maybe remove that. I don't want the spam.
I'm not scared.
All right. Well,
right,
thanks,
thank you.
Candace, and thank you, Roman.